Happy to be joined today by Andrew Kramer, covers the Vikings, of course, for the Star Tribune. We do a film review every Tuesday, and some bigger than others. Andrew, this week we're talking about the Vikings and looking ahead to a playoff game. We've known for a long time that they were going to be in the playoffs. We finally know their opponent now will be the New York Giants, a team they defeated just a few weeks ago, albeit narrowly, at US Bank Stadium. Andrew, maybe to departure a little bit on this segment from what we usually do, in that a lot of times we look back at what happened in the previous game, kind of some things to glean from that. Not a ton probably to glean from a game against the Bears where it looked like the Bears were pretty interested in losing and maybe trying to get the number one overall pick, which they did get. And the Vikings were, trying to fine tune some things, but we're pretty sure that they were going to wind up as the 3 seed anyway, as they did when San Francisco won their game. But I guess spinning this forward to this playoff matchup against the Giants, Andrew, what do we think about particularly the offensive line, and now going against this team for a second time, but no Brian O'Neill, and unsure exactly of who's going to line up at center, and that's a problem against a team like the Giants, which we've been talking about for a while now.
Yeah, it might end up being Chris Reed, who made his first NFL start at center. He was a veteran guard, but he'd made all of those starts at guard for other teams. And so it's not ideal. It's not the way you want it if you're the Minnesota Vikings, but they are holding out hope that Garrett Bradbury can come back to practice this week, that his back can respond well to that. And if so, he could play on Sunday, but it's not something they're banking on. I talked to Ezra Cleveland at Soldier Field yesterday after the game, and he mentioned that we got to move forward with Chris and pretend like it's going to be Chris, because we just can't bank on Garrett right now. And that work that they got Sunday in Chicago in the first half was so vital, because it could be the only work that starting group gets together, or the longest work they get together before that playoff game. And that's, again, not the way they drew it up. It is their 4th different offensive line combination in the last 7 games, I believe. And that's after the starters had made it together from training camp all the way through the first 10 games of the season. It was going really well for them. And it's just fallen apart with one hit after another. The good news is, when you look at this Giants matchup, I think it's a pretty good one in terms of they do have some stout players up front, and they're very blitz happy. But as we saw on Sunday, Kirk's pretty good against that. They can move the ball. They can throw the ball. That was the game where Hawkinson and Jefferson each had 12 catches. Hawkinson was the leading receiver in that game right up until the very end on the final drive, where Jefferson had some big plays, including the screen to set up a 61-yard field goal. So they narrowly beat the Giants, but the offense was looking pretty decent. And so I feel like in a playoff atmosphere, that's something you're going to want to bank on again. And I think their offense will look much better, certainly, than it did in Green Bay 2 weeks ago.
And offensive line wise, you talked a little bit about continuity and maybe at least getting those guys to play together for a half, trying to get some of those cadences down. But it wasn't particularly, all smooth. The running game still leaving a lot to be desired right now. They had, Dalvin Cook fumbled. Maybe that took a little bit of the steam out of things. They got Madison going a little bit in that game. But, big picture wise, do you feel like they accomplished what they needed to accomplish to feel good about themselves going into this matchup?
I'll just say they at least got some work. Yeah, because you're right. The work wasn't always...
So no, is what you're saying.
Well, you want them to look better than that. Yeah, Chicago is a very bad defense. I think we need to keep that in perspective, that even though they win 29-13, even though it was a comfortable lead at 16-6 at halftime, this offense wasn't lights out. This was still a group that needed a lot of work together, and they've only got now those 2 quarters as their longest stretch together. So it's not enough, but it's at least some. And that's what makes it important work for them together. But that doesn't mean that against Kayvon Thibodeau, Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, these guys that the Giants have up front, that's going to be a much, much tougher task, and one that they handled better with Brian O'Neill, with Austin Schlottman. Both of those guys won't be playing for them on Sunday. It's going to be tough. It really is, because you did want that run game to look better. I think it was 6 of Dalvin Cook's 11 runs were 2 yards or fewer, and only a couple of those were near the line, near the goal line, in those really short yardage spots. So it's not been good, and that's the same story through and through. I think I saw some stat too earlier that the Jacksonville Jaguars were the only team that had as many runs stuffed as the Vikings. They're not a good power team. They're a finesse offense. And then when you take out those starting finesse players, there's just not good players behind them right now. And Ed Ingram is the only guy who's played every snap on that offense this season, and he's probably one of the worst players as a second round rookie.
Yeah, I mean, and I saw a stat on TV the other night. I'm not sure which game. It might have been the Bears Packers game. I'm not sure which game it was, but the Vikings are, among the fewest rushing attempts per game in the league. And when Mike Zimmer was here, we used to joke around about he wants to establish the run, things like that. Kevin O'Connell seems to be at a point where he's just like, we'll try it, but we're a passing team, and we're just not going to mess around with that. The problem with that is if the Giants know you're going to pass, they can bring a lot of that pressure, and it puts a lot of the impetus on Kirk Cousins to get the ball out, puts a lot of impetus on Justin Jefferson to win matchups quickly, and Kevin O'Connell to scheme up things that they're going to be able to beat them, because there is going to be pressure on them. I'm not sure how much pressure. I can't remember how much pressure Cousins faced against the Giants in that first matchup, but I imagine there was a fair amount of it.
It was. I think he took 4 sacks in that game, and I believe he took 11 hits. And there was just a number of his passes that were batted too at the line. You have to really kind of ride a super thin margin when you're playing against so much pressure, because oftentimes there's going to be defenders around your throwing lanes. They're going to be getting their arms up. Tip balls can lead to interceptions, as we've seen. The Vikings' turnover luck continued against the Giants in that last matchup. They won that one 2-0. Didn't turn the ball over. The Giants, though, have the second fewest turnovers in the NFL. They've won by taking care of the football. And as we've talked about, you and I think 3 weeks ago, playing a similar brand of football as the Vikings, where you want to just kind of play ball control. They're going to run it, obviously, a lot more than the Vikings will, but they want to try to control the ball and play smart and take the ball away on defense, even though they give up a ton of yards. So no matter what, I expect this to be another shootout too. But yeah, against the Giants, it's going to be a really tough task, because Kirk Cousins was banged up against that Giants defense, much like he's been against a lot of defenses this year.
With the stuffed runs, I mean, that's been a problem all year long, like you said, and again, continued against a Bears team that, again, like you said, is not very good. Is there one thing you can point to? Is it the interior getting pushed back? Is it one missed assignment here and there? How do we kind of characterize why they've had so many running plays that go for either 0 yards, negative yards, or even those 1 or 2 yarders are putting you into a second and long or a third and medium situation that you don't want to be in?
I think a lot of people have a hand in that. Part of it's O'Connell too. Part of it's not letting this run game get into much of a rhythm, and then not maybe knowing too what are the right runs to call in certain situations. He's putting a lot on Kirk's plate too. Kirk can have the option, depending on what he sees, to kill a run or check into a pass, depending on the options he's given at the line of scrimmage, much more than he has in previous years. So sometimes they're not always getting into the right play, even though Kirk has been pretty good with that throughout the year. The biggest problem is what we've talked about. It's the offensive line. It's the combinations, new guys getting in there recently. They weren't a great run team in the first 10 weeks of the season, but they were getting the job done, especially in the red zone. They were one of the best red zone offenses in football, in part because they could mix it up a little bit. Alexander Mattison was getting early touchdowns. Dalvin Cook was getting some early touchdowns, and that helped that offense kind of maintain itself there in that spot. But recently, that short yardage stuff has completely dried up, and that has been a problem for them because it makes them really one-sided. And now TJ Hawkinson and Justin Jefferson have really become their only options in those areas. It was good to see, if you're them, it was good to see Adam Thielen get involved again. If he can become more healthy with that, he's dealt with a knee injury that I think has really limited him and this offense too. So in general, I think they're going to need to find a way to get that run game going, but it's been that offensive line missing blocks, missing combinations. Penalties have set them back as well on offense. So there's a lot of culprits.
Couple more things for you, Andrew, before we finish up. Let's switch to the other side of the ball. I mean, the Giants, moved the ball pretty well against the Vikings in that game. It was the 2 turnovers, and it was kind of the bend but don't break for the Vikings because, they didn't give up a ton of points. At least it was a relatively high scoring affair, but it could have been more for the Giants. You got Daniel Jones making his playoff debut. You've got a pretty good running game with Saquon Barkley. I mean, the Vikings, trying some different things towards the end of the year. I don't know how well they're working versus how much they're really able to do with kind of the cast of characters they have right now. What would you imagine they're going to try to do when they play the Giants this time around?
Yeah, I think they need to get after Daniel Jones one way or another. I think they need to empty their bag of tricks, however many they've piled up throughout the end of the year.
What if there are no tricks, Andrew? What if there is no bag?
Patrick Peterson's talked about how Ed's gone back in the lab, and him and his coaching staff have tried to come up with some ways to pressure the quarterback, because as much as they want to be about the four-man rush, it has just not been there consistently. Zadarius Smith had like 9 sacks in the first 10 games, and he finished with 10 sacks on the year. The pressures were there, but the sacks were not. Quarterbacks figured out how to get the ball out, how to attack underneath. All of those things just kind of led to the Vikings continually giving up so much yardage. And then when Cam Dantzler was in there, he was giving up a lot of big plays, which is why you've seen Duke Shelley become that starter. So against Daniel Jones, though, I think you got to be willing to blitz more. You got to be willing to send Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks, some of these guys that Ed Donatel has preferred to keep back in a lot of his shell defenses and coverages. They blitzed Daniel Jones a little bit more. It was actually their second game of last month where they started kind of ramping up the pressure, and it worked. Daniel Jones, I believe, was pressured almost 40% in that game. He did get some yardage. They did give up some big plays. But some of that stuff's like a 4th down run by Saquon Barkley for a touchdown at the end that is rather inexcusable no matter which defense they're playing. And they've been actually pretty good at stopping the run in those spots. It's been the pass that has been really hurting them. So if I'm them, I ramp up that pressure even more and just send every blitz that you got on that call sheet.
This isn't so much a film review as much as it is a kind of a brain review. But as you think about this team right now, they're 13-4. They're a field goal favorite at home against a team that's not great. I still sense there's a lot of skepticism about the Vikings, and rightfully so. They finished with more points allowed than points scored. I mean, no 13-4 team in history has obviously ever done that. We have an impression of them as one thing. What do you think they think of themselves as they go into the playoffs right now? Do you sense a confident team? Do you sense a team kind of searching for itself after some late season hiccups and injuries? Where do you think their heads are at?
Well, I think it's different for everybody, but the veterans and leaders of that locker room, at least the ones I've spoken to, are pretty confident in what they're capable of. And what they're confident in is some of the main components of this offense, which is important, and their defense as well. But when you talk about the offense, it's Kirk Cousins, who has earned the confidence of that locker room with so many fourth quarter comebacks. It's Kevin O'Connell, who's earned the confidence with the same results in time management and all that stuff, even though there was some weird stuff at the end of the first half on Sunday. And then you've also got Justin Jefferson, he's the youngest player ever to lead the NFL in receptions and receiving yards. That trio has won them a lot of games, a lot of high-scoring games at times. And I think that leads them to believe that they can lean on things like Buffalo, the greatest comeback of all time, even though it was against the Colts. Coming back 33-0 and a half is remarkable against anybody. It shows them that they have that potency to them as a team. And we've seen them defensively take the ball away and really wreak havoc when they're playing well, when they're playing great. It hasn't always been there, obviously, but they can take advantage of lesser quarterbacks when they're playing well. And offensively, they can put up points. So I think they know that, and they feel confident going into it. But that doesn't mean that in an honest moment, they wouldn't admit that, hey, with this offensive line that we got going, with some of the guys on defense nursing injuries, it's important to remember Zadarius Smith has been carrying a knee injury with him. He was out for a personal matter this week, but he's been carrying a knee injury with him throughout much of the season. Harrison Smith was on the injury report with a neck injury 3 weeks ago. Eric Kendricks, a hip injury. They've been healthy and available, but just healthy enough to be available. So there's a lot of questions about this team, and rightfully so, but the belief has come from those 13 wins, and I think that's not something to be dismissed.
No, it's not, and it's just an interesting way to go into the playoffs. I mean, it feels different from a lot of the Vikings teams that have won the division, that have piled up double-digit wins. It feels different, like Patrick and Royce and I talked about on Monday's show. Feels different than 2017. Feels different than 2009. Just a different confidence level, different feel in this team. Yet the record is about the same, and anything can happen in the playoffs. So we will see what happens. We're all curious. We're Andrew, Ben, a lot of us will be there on Sunday to document it. Check it out. Check everything out. Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. Andrew, thank you as always, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good, Mike. Thanks for having me.